The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Great crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and addressed them. If anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Which of you wishing to construct a tower does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if there is enough for its completion? Otherwise, after laying the foundation and finding himself unable to finish the work, the onlookers should laugh at him and say, "This one began to build, but did not have the resources to finish." Or what king marching into battle would not first sit down and decide whether with 10,000 troops he can successfully oppose another king advancing upon him with 20,000 troops? And if not, while he is still far away, he will send a delegation to ask for peace terms. In the same way, any one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. The Gospel of the Lord. 16 years ago this month, Mother Teresa died. Now she was, as you recall, an icon in the world. She was highly respected, not only in the Catholic faith, but in other religions also admired her greatly. Even those who had no religion admired her greatly because of her total commitment to Christ and her compassion that she had for the poor. She described one time that her urge to follow Christ was like a thirst. She had this thirst to give everything to Christ. And certainly, I think in my lifetime, she probably stands at the top of the list of people in the world who perhaps to the greatest extent showed that absolute, total commitment and the willingness to live out what the gospel is calling us to do. Now, not very many of us can be like a Mother Teresa. That's a unique individual, and she was a nun and took vows of poverty and so on. And the vast majority of people can't do that. But yet we are still called to be disciples of Jesus, a life of holiness in whatever our chosen profession is, young, old, married, single, whether we're professional, laborers, whatever our job, whatever our work is, we're called to a level of holiness according to our state in life. You know, and that's kind of what the gospel is about today, is the demands of discipleship. Now, certainly Mother Teresa was willing to make that, calculate the cost, and she was willing to do all that. And Jesus talks a few things here today that at first might sound a little bit shocking. When he says we are to hate our father and mother. If anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, even his own self, he cannot be my disciple. It sounds a little shocking because after all, we're supposed to love one another, and especially our parents. Honor your father and your mother, the fourth commandment. But I think it's important to understand the context here. The context isn't hate as we understand the word hate. He's really saying we have to love Christ above all things. We have to love Christ even more than you love your father and mother, even more than you love your wife and children, even more than you love your brothers and sisters, and even more than you love yourself. That's the context that he's talking about here. That's one of the demands, if you will, of discipleship. You know, and the other thing that sort of complicates things sometimes, and he goes on and talks a little bit about carrying the cross. Carrying the cross. And sometimes our own struggle and difficulty in life can be an impediment for us, an impediment in the way that we come to know God and the way we live our faith. Some time ago, I was visiting with somebody, a lady who was telling me kind of part of her life story. And she was telling me that from all the things that she sort of had suffered in her life, As a young girl, she had been abused. Her father was murdered when she was a young girl. Her own mother and her brother were killed tragically in a fire. She endured a terrible accident and received a back injury that continues to cause intense pain every day of her life. And she was just relating all this to me, and I'm thinking, this is like Job. This is like Job in the Old Testament, who had a whole series of things just go wrong, one thing after another, one thing after another. And she was just simply saying how difficult it was for her to be a person of faith. Always kind of nagging questions. Where's God in all this? Why am I suffering so much? And why did the people that I love so much have to suffer? Well, it's not always easy to give an answer to those kinds of questions that when we get asked. And I just said, I can't share your kind of suffering. I haven't endured that you have. But somehow the gospel and the message of our faith tells us that in the carrying out of and the enduring of our own sufferings, there is some healing involved in that, healing of our sins, or the preparing of us in holiness. We have to believe that somehow in the suffering that there is either healing of our sins or somehow it's preparing us for a life of holiness. That's what our faith teaches us. It's not always easy to accept that when we're undergoing those kinds of hardships, but that's what it comes down to. And these words of the gospel come to mind as well. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now there's an interesting little detail in this gospel. Come after me. You have to carry your cross and come after Jesus. Now this is written by St. Luke. St. Luke is a very good author here. He's a good writer, and he's very consistent with this thought process. Because we're going to see later on in the gospel when Jesus is carrying his own cross, we see this person called Simon of Cyrene is going to come out of the crowd, and St. Luke, and only in St. Luke does it say that Simon of Cyrene carries his cross behind Jesus. He's carrying his cross behind Jesus. In the other Gospels, we tend to think of Simon helping Jesus carry his own cross. That's what Matthew says. But St. Luke says that Simon carries his cross after Jesus. He's walking behind him. And so St. Luke has this clear idea that in our own sufferings that we carry in our life, that we are very much connected to the sufferings of Jesus when he carried his cross. And that's what he's talking about here. If you do not carry your own cross and come after me and follow me, you cannot be your disciple. So he's talking a great deal here about the cost of discipleship and the demands of discipleship. And we realize that it's not always easy, but we try to do that in our lives. Let's return a little bit now to Mother Teresa. I mentioned her in my opening remarks. And one of the quotes from her, one of her commentaries on who she was this. She said, "By blood, I am an Albanian. By citizenship, I am from India. By faith, I am a Catholic nun. As to my calling, I belong to the world. And as to my heart, I belong entirely to the heart of Jesus." Well, that's a pretty good summary for her, and it really expresses her deeply held belief that our relationship with Christ should trump all other relationships.